A few years ago, I was given the chance to read the novelization of Ys VIII Lacrimosa of Dana, written by Anna Kashina in a partnership with Dragonwell Books and Nihon Falcom. Well, in April of 2026, they teamed up again to produce a novelization of Ys IX Monstrum Nox that I was also sent a copy of, and I wanted to talk about this book as well. I know this is a little out of the norm for the channel, but hopefully I can bring a good perspective from someone who enjoyed the game on how this novel translated the story of the game into a new medium. For those who are curious about my book background, well, let's just say I actually own more books than I do games, so I would say I'm a bit of a reader. A quick bit of background for anyone unfamiliar with the game. Ys IX Monstrum Nox is an action RPG developed by Nihon Falcom and published in the West by NIS America. Like almost all of the Ys games, it follows Adol Kristen, the red-haired adventurer, and in the Ys timeline, this is the current oldest version of Adol as it takes place after the events of Ys VII. It takes place in the city of Balduc in the Glia region, basically the Ys series' version of France, and includes Adol alongside his faithful companion Dogi, but otherwise filled with new characters. The game was originally released in Japan of 2019 and 2021 in the West. I will try to make this a review of just the Ys IX novelization, but I may reference some of the things I liked or didn't care for in the Ys VIII novelization because I think there is significant overlap between them, but I will make sure to establish what those overall critiques or compliments are instead of just assuming people watch that first review, although you should watch that first review too, I'm just saying. Like with that first novelization, this is regarded as simply one interpretation of the events of Adol and Balduc, so if you have different thoughts or feelings, as I sometimes do, from what is written on the page, then those are just as valid. I will do my best to avoid outright story spoilers, but I will be talking about plot points or changes that may give clues as to story content, so you have been warned. Like with the previous novelization, I hesitate to recommend this book as someone's first experience of the story that the game tells, as the game simply is more fleshed out and better paced, but the writing is acceptable, and I think someone could find enjoyment in the adventure. I will break down this review into 3 sections: what was adapted faithfully, what was cut, and what was added to the story, and how each one was done either well or not so well. We will start with the faithful adaptation. The basic outline of the story remains the same, with Adol and Dogi arriving in Balduc, Adol's imprisonment, his escape and encounter with Aprilis turning him into a monstrum, and the monstrum adventures after that point. The characters are very true to their character counterparts from the game, especially the monstrums, as the author has a gift for adapting the dialogue of the game into a narrative format in a way that feels authentic to the characters. I talked about this in my Ys VIII review, but Adol's inner thoughts and dialogues are in almost all cases really well done. He feels like the Adol I envision while playing the games in almost all moments. I'll get to the exception later on. He loves adventure, is a keen observer of human behavior, and is knowledgeable on many different topics that make sense given his history and his interest in adventuring. His dialogue is mostly built from the responses given in-game, and even when the author doesn't have that base to build on, it all feels very natural for Adol. The other monstrums have a similar sense of continuity, with their personalities shining through and Adol's observations of them feeling like they could be coming from the player when encountering each of the monstrums for the first time. Major side characters also get that treatment, such as Shantae and Parks. Due to the compressed nature of the book compared to the game though, many of the side characters you may have grown to love in the game either have limited roles or do not appear at all. I would say the only person who is a prominent character in the book and the game who didn't exactly feel right is Dogi, and again that's partly because the game sort of sidelined him to begin with, so the book did so as well. I don't think that's necessarily an issue of the author's interpretation as opposed to the structure of the original story. While the chapters were well adapted, there were 2 areas of the book that I think were accurate to the description of the game but didn't quite have the same weight. The first are the locations. Balduc as a city and the locations within Balduc have strong energy and atmosphere in the game. Sure, one might quibble about all the gray for the coloring and the design, but I found each district, each building, and each dungeon compelling. The author does try to give each location its due, but the descriptions never quite captured that same energy. I would say the Dandelion and Prison are the closest to doing so, and those are the two locations that feature most prominently in both the game and the book, because they are the most important overall. Therefore, what I think likely happened is that the other locations simply couldn't keep up because they weren't important enough to warrant longer description. This also comes up for the battles that survived the cuts, mainly to the Grimwald Nox encounters, as those battles typically lasted a page at most, and weren't extensive with the details beyond Adol swung his sword at this while Hawk did this, and so on and so forth. It is a symptom of the adaptation process that unfortunately meant that by prioritizing each story event appearing in the narrative meant that the location and battle descriptions took a back seat, and we couldn't settle into the location or the moment as well as we could because we needed to get to the next plot point, which meant that the pacing was very fast. The second area that was accurate but didn't have the same impact came with the plot twists. I don't know if it was simply the order in which the information was presented or the narrative taking us through Adol's thought process, piecing together information, but they didn't feel like twists in the narrative anymore. The moments were impactful, but they were completely unsurprising, and I felt lacked the same weight that the game narrative managed to convey because of the lack of surprise. I would say that Monstrum Nox was a faithful recreation of the story of Ys IX, with strong focus on making the characters feel real, and the story followed the beats of the original story pretty much note for note. The details that got lost in this focus on story accuracy, plus the desire to keep the book a manageable length, mainly involved location and battle descriptions. That leads me into the next section about what was cut for the book. I have touched on the main things that were cut already. Firstly, the side quests that you are tasked with are completely gone. I can't think of a single one that made the cut, which is completely understandable. While those are great world-building activities and give good game rewards, the only one I thought there was any chance of keeping wasn't even a designated side quest. It was the feather collecting activity, and that was just because of the connection to Ys VIII at the culmination of that activity. Several side characters are cut entirely as well, and those that remain apart from Parks, Shantae, Iris, and Clara have their roles severely cut. Another understandable move, even if my favorite NPC character, Arch, was cut entirely. The second area of cuts for the book comes with cutting down the number of battles / length of them. In some ways this is hard to judge, because if I simply described how I beat a particular boss, it may come across in written form similar to the descriptions from the book, but for certain fights I simply would expect more action and at least some moments of our heroes being put on the back foot in ways that are not just the scripted ones from the game. The Grimwald Nox also loses prominence because of this, and because most of the Grimwald Nox battles are in the raid format that was first introduced in Ys VIII, that makes it even more difficult to distinguish them from others, and definitely none of the skirmishes across the city are included. I think it makes sense to cut down on the battles, but sometimes I feel like the simplification of the fights that do remain makes the stakes feel less urgent and important because the characters never truly seem to be in danger, and the few moments that danger does exist, it is dispatched in a page or two. Therefore, for the cuts, I think they all make sense. While the pacing of the book is very fast, I think doing it another way would have made this book a ponderous read, full of descriptions that slowed the pace to a crawl. There is nothing that was cut from the Ys IX narrative that I think has a significant negative impact on the story, and I think the author works well within the confines of the medium of print to establish the most important points, which again are the story and character moments. The action is the biggest casualty of this process, but it is hard to find fault when there is a need to tell a concise and coherent story. Now for the additions to the story. There are not numerous ones, as the narrative is very faithful and there is not much in the way of added scenes. There is added dialogue to certain scenes and some details that come through in print that don't come through in the game or simply come across in a different way. My favorite of these was using the spoken dialogue titles of the monstrums when they were in monstrum form or in that role versus their actual name in the other moments. I don't have the visual benefit of seeing them transform, so the changing of the names allows me to better visualize it. I like the distinction because it helps capture the imagination without having to describe transformation every single time, and makes sense given that some of the characters have different behaviors and styles in their regular form versus their monstrum form. Now, as for the edition that didn't work for me, there was one notable area in the Ys VIII novelization that really didn't work for me, and that is the romance. I talked earlier about what a great sense for Adol the author has. The romance is the one area that doesn't gel with my understanding of the character of Adol. I have seen him as a romantic hero, but his romance to me was more about his love of adventuring, and maybe one exception because canon. And Adol's romantic nature features in the books via his passion for history, architecture, and even his nostalgia for previous adventures. However, in Ys VIII, Adol pursued an actual romance in there, and there was an entirely new added romance for Ys VIII as well that is not featured in any form in the text of the game. Now, Monstrum Nox does not go for a full-blown romance the way that Lacrimosa of Dana did, nor does it add any entirely new romances to the other cast, again, something seen in Lacrimosa of Dana. The balance, I think, is much better in Monstrum Nox because Adol is more focused on the adventures, both the current one and the past ones, that are brought up during the game. However, there are some hints towards a potential attraction between Adol and one of the NPCs that does not appear in the game, and I feel is unnecessary. Trying to squeeze in all the events of the game to begin with is tough, even when you have 400 plus pages to do it. Adding in superfluous descriptions of Adol's admiration and possible attraction for a character does not help. That is the one addition to the story that I think is unnecessary. Would losing it really make much of a difference in the long run? Probably not, but I simply would have wished for something else. Overall, I think Monstrum Nox does a good job of capturing the adventure of Adol and Dogi in the city of Balduq. The characters pop off the page just as they do the screen, and the book is very faithful to the events of the game. I definitely recommend this novel to any Ys fans who are also readers who want to re-experience the story in a new format. I am curious now that Anna Kashina has done novelizations for Ys VIII and Ys IX about what the next project would be. I believe she expressed an interest in doing a novelization for Ys I and II, which I think would be a fantastic duo to adapt because there is less material to work with, so we can see what the author would do with describing the battles and places in greater detail, and maybe the pacing would slow down and allow us to really focus in on Adol and his development. Plus, there's some more built-in romance to play into, which definitely would fit the author appeal. The other option I would think of would be Ys X, which could be great, especially with switching between Adol and Karja's perspectives. Let me know what you think and leave this video a like and comment if you enjoyed it. Thank you to Dragonwell Publishing for the review copy to the book. Subscribe if you have not already. I can't guarantee many more book reviews, but I do hope for more Ys soon enough and certainly more games in general. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and happy gaming.